Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Salesforce User Group webinar. My name is Andy Cluck, and I'm on the marketing team here at Ledgeview Partners. We're a Salesforce Silver consulting partner. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with us, Ledgeview Partners helps businesses transform their approach to sales, marketing, and customer service by aligning the teams to focus on improving their customers' overall experience, while also providing management with metrics through the technology to evaluate their success. For today's user group, we're going to be covering our featured topics, and that's going to be tying Salesforce to your email, Salesforce and Outlook playing nice together, email options for Salesforce, and getting your emails inside of Salesforce. Also, we answer any questions that you might have submitted during registration. Before I turn things over to our presenter today, I just have a couple of those housekeeping items to cover. First off, today's webinar is being recorded, and that's going to be available on demand after the live session today. So all attendees and you will receive an email shortly following this webinar, and that's going to have a link to access the presentation on demand. I encourage you to share this with your team and network as well. To ensure the best audio quality, we do have everyone listen-only mode, but if you do have a question, please submit those in the question pane on the GoToWebinar control panel. You'll see that there. We do have a lot to cover in a short time, so we promise to follow up after the webinar to answer any of those questions you submit. All right, now it's time to introduce our presenter today, Ben Doler. So Ben has Salesforce certifications in administration, advanced administrator, Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, and App Builder. Ben has been working in the Salesforce environment for over 10 years. So I'm not going to take up any more of his time because what he has to say is a lot more interesting. So Ben, let's talk about email and Outlook working with Salesforce.
All right, thanks, Andy. So, yep, as Andy mentioned, my name is Ben. I'm going to be walking through all of the email options here for Salesforce. You'll see on the screen we have our agenda outline. We're going to cover topics like utilizing my email to Salesforce, Salesforce for Outlook and Lightning for Outlook, and what those really are and what's the difference between the two of those. We're also going to look at Lightning Sync, and then we did pull some questions from registration to into the webinar as well, because we had some really good questions and some questions that we actually get quite often from customers. So we want to highlight those, and we'll discuss those as well. And then lastly, we have some resources. So once we go through all this, I mean, there's a lot of information here around the email and how it ties to Salesforce. And we want to provide all those links. So we've outlined all that into one slide, and we'll end up providing that at the end of the presentation as well. So without further ado, let's jump right in that first topic, my email to Salesforce. So honestly, this is the easiest thing to set up within Salesforce for tying your emails to records within Salesforce. And what this is it's essentially the simplest of all the email options that Salesforce has. It provides a unique email address to each Salesforce user within your organization that they can then use on the CC or the BCC fields and have those emails then push up into Salesforce and log against records. So any one of your users can use this. If you are a user within a system, this might already be enabled for you. There are some orgs that have been happening or been released over the course of time where Salesforce has this feature enabled by default. In other instances where they don't, so they've kind of gone back and forth on this. So there's a chance it's already enabled for you. If not, you would need to get your admin just to turn it on. And it's literally just a checkbox that needs to be enabled for it to be set for all users to be able to utilize. So the benefit of using my email to Salesforce, this function, is that you can use it with any email address. It doesn't necessarily have to be an email that's tied to a client or a work email. Say you've got multiple emails. Maybe you also want to be able to send emails from a personal email address. Maybe customers of yours are sending, somehow they got one of your other email addresses, not necessarily your work email, but a Yahoo or a Gmail account. If they're sending emails to those, you can utilize this email address to then push those emails that they've sent up into Salesforce so you can have that correspondence still tracked. It can be used on any type of client. It doesn't matter if you're running Outlook or if you have Thunderbird or any other type of actual client-based application. You can use it with any of those, as well as any web client. So if you have you're utilizing OWA, the Outlook Web Access, or if you're using Gmail, you can use it from there, as well as mobile devices. So it really encompasses everything across all systems where you can utilize this function. In short, what it's doing is it's providing you your own private email address for sending emails into Salesforce per user. So before you just jump into this and look at it and say, oh, we need to use this right now, there are some things you need to consider when you're looking at my email to Salesforce. And that is whenever Salesforce is processing an email that's been sent to the system that way. It's only going to be looking at the to and the CC fields and matching that against a standard email address field in Salesforce. So if in your instance you set up an email to or an email 3 or an alternate email on your contacts or your leads, those are going to be ignored when Salesforce is processing the emails. It's only going to look at the standard email fields under those objects. Also, if you're putting, if you're sending an email, if you're sending out a mass email and you've got 20, 30 people on this email, you're putting everyone's email in the BCC field. Salesforce isn't going to catch those emails and capture those as it's pushing them into the system. It's only going to be looking at the to and the CC field. Now you can include your unique email address that Salesforce provides in any of those fields. However, it's a best practice to make sure you're only utilizing that on the blind carbon copy field. If you start putting it in on the to or the carbon copy, what might happen is your recipient may see what that email address is and inadvertently reply to it or start using it thinking they're replying to you, when in fact that's then trying to be processed by Salesforce. Also, lastly on here, the maximum number. So when we talk about the email, if you're sending out a large email, the cap is at 50 unique email addresses. So if between the to and the CC fields, you've got more than 50, Salesforce is going to only process the first 50 that it sees on that email. So when we go in and we look at this and you're going through as a user, when you get in to set it up, you're going to see, we're going to jump into a demo. I'm going to show some of this, but you'll see essentially these couple of fields, these couple of areas on that My Email is Salesforce setup page. Once you go in and say, once it's enabled and you go in and want to configure it, they generate an email address and there's a long email. You'll see there it says email to Salesforce at, and I blanked out a whole bunch of characters. That was from a dev account. There's a long, almost 64 character-ish email address that's at salesforce.com, and they generate that and that is unique to you as a user. And what you'll do is take that and store it in as a contact in your address book so that you can start utilizing it. And then also on there, you get to decide, how do I want to process emails that get sent into the system this way? Do I want them to automatically link up and attach them to leads and contacts? What if there are duplicates? Do I want to go for the record that has the most activity or the oldest one? If there isn't anything matching, how do I want to handle it? Do I just want to dump everything into my unresolved items? There's a spot where if Salesforce can't process the email or it accepts the email but doesn't know where to put it, it will dump it into a holding area called My Unresolved Items, which is unique to each user. And from there, you can go in and look to see what was this email, who was it supposed to belong to. You can search through the system to find out who it should be attached to and then attach it to that individual. So even though, coming back to that alternate email, if you send one up and you know the email address is in the system, but maybe it's not on the primary email field, it's on some secondary email field, that email will still be captured and held by Salesforce and waiting for you to handle it and attach it to the correct record. So walking through this from a setup standpoint, from a user standpoint, incredibly simple. There's over on the top right, if you go under your name, there'll be a My Settings area. And from within settings, you go into the email that's on the left, you go into My Email to Salesforce. If that exists, you have it. It's ready to go. Admin doesn't need to do anything. You're set up to use it. You can start using it right now. If it's not there, then you have to get your system administrator involved. And again, it's just a simple checkbox that they would need to enable to turn this on from a function standpoint within your org. The other steps that you need to look at is valid email addresses. By default, it's going to use your default email address and username as your valid sending addresses for where it will accept email from. Again, if you have other email addresses like a Gmail account or another email you want to process inbound emails from, you can add it to that list. And then lastly, your email associations. How do we want to handle these? Do I just want to throw everything into My Unresolved? Do I want to try to automatically link against leads and contacts or opportunities, etc.? So let me jump into our org here. So we have a demo org, and I'll show you where this is all set up. So from the up at the top right, I'll go under my name, and I'll go under my settings here. And once I'm on the settings page, over here on the left, there's all these configuration options for me as an individual user. If I expand on email, I'll see the last option in this section is My Email to Salesforce. Now, this is a piece where I was mentioning, if this link is not here, then this option is not enabled for your org. If it is here, it's already on and you don't need to do anything else other than to go into it and configure how you want to use it and save that email address. So if I go into this link, My Email to Salesforce, I'm taken to a page where it generates this long email address for me that I can then copy and store as a contact. So I can go into my Outlook and save this as email to Salesforce or email Salesforce or however I want to title it, so I can, access it via quick commands whenever I'm typing up emails. And then as I go further down, here's my acceptable email address section where I've got my email address and perhaps I have some email at gmail.com that I have that I also want to accept emails from because I've given this email out to some people and they emailed that one instead of my work account. I can do this so that if I send emails from my Gmail account into Salesforce using this address, it will also accept them. If not, it will reject them. It won't even accept them into the system and they won't show up in your unresolved items or be attached to anything. And then lastly, further down is this email association section. So from here, you want to go through and decide, what do you want to automatically try to link against opportunities? Leads and contacts are on by default. You can decide whether you want to keep those on or off. One of the things that we always recommend to people who are setting this up is if you happen to push emails or send emails out that have PDF attachments, maybe you're doing quotes or things, checking this box for always save email attachments can be beneficial, but keep in mind that when processing emails, sometimes images are also considered attachments. So if you have a lot of like LinkedIn logos or company logos that are in your signature, and you say that you always want to save those email attachments, it's going to treat those as attachments as well and bring them in. So there's a trade-off to whether or not you actually want to have this checked. Lastly, for email me confirmation of association, that's handy to have the first few times you use it, but if you end up utilizing this a lot, this can get overbearing. The Salesforce will start sending you emails on a regular basis for every single email that's processing. So it's fine to leave it on initially, but just know that if you want to turn that off after maybe the first few days or the first week or the first month, you need to just come back into this under settings and email, my email to Salesforce, and down here at the bottom, you can untick this box for email me a confirmation so that you'll stop receiving those confirmations of emails being processed against records. All right, let's jump back into the slides again. So that was my email to Salesforce. That honestly will take less than 5 minutes to set up if it's already enabled within your org. Now, as we get into other parts of the system, other options for tying in email, these get a little more complex. These sometimes require a network admin, sometimes require system administrator, but there's some good use cases for these and some differentiating factors between how they operate. So the first one we want to jump into is Salesforce for Outlook. Now, this was Salesforce's first act in tying Outlook and Exchange to Salesforce, and what it is it is it's a plugin that runs an executable application that runs in Windows that connects to your Outlook client and runs as a little sidebar. So anybody who's a user has access to this. However, it requires an admin to go in and set up a profile and attach the user to that profile for them to be able to utilize it. So any user can go and install the application, assuming they have the rights to install applications on their machine. That may require a network admin within your organization. But once it's installed, they still have to have something else additional set up by a system admin for it to function. Now, one of the benefits of Salesforce for Outlook, or SFO, is it's commonly abbreviated throughout the web as SFO, is that you can link contacts, you can link leads, accounts, opportunities, cases, and even custom objects to the emails as you're pushing emails up. It'll also allow you to synchronize contacts and events and tasks between your Outlook client and Salesforce, and even create cases from emails. Now, one of the things to keep in mind here is this is running client side. So this requires Outlook to be up and running for a user for it to function. It does not run behind the scenes. So when we look at when you look at this option compared to some of the other ones, this is one of its negatives. If your Outlook client isn't up and running, it's not doing anything for you. Outlook needs to be up and open and running for it to be doing any sort of synchronization. That's one of the things that you need to consider when you're looking at this. Now, also, since it was their first rendition of how to hook in Outlook to Salesforce, they started off with Outlook 2007. Now it's being deprecated with the winter release, so I didn't include that here. It technically going forward will only work with Outlook 2010 and above on PC. It does not work on Mac at all. So for anyone that has Macs or are Mac users within your organization, Salesforce for Outlook is not going to be a viable option. It only works for PC users. And lastly, as we start to look at things that we have to think about when looking at Salesforce for Outlook, is that if you decide to pursue Salesforce for Outlook, one user cannot use both types of applications. So Salesforce for Outlook and Lightning for Outlook are on a per user basis. Both of them cannot run at the same time. A user has to use one or the other. Now, you can blend in your organization and have some users on SFO and some users on LFO or Lightning for Outlook, but the same user can't be testing both, so they have to choose one or the other. So as we get in and look at this, I do not have a demo setup of this because as being the same user, I can't run both of these, and I opted to run Lightning for Outlook instead as a demonstration. But I've got screen grabs, screenshots of when I set up Salesforce for Outlook in one of our test accounts as well. So on an email, whether I'm in a preview mode or whether I have the email open, there's a little sidebar that's over there on the right that pulls up that will do a cross check of a contact that sent me an email, and we'll try to pull all their information in. So if we look at an expanded view of this, it pulls in name, it pulls in title, the account, email, phone. It starts looking at related records like activities and opportunities and cases, and it tries to pull all that information into that little sidebar. Now from here, I could then go and click on any one of those little mail icons with a plus and attach that email up to that specific record, whether that be the contact or the account or the opportunity or a case. So allow me to go and push those up, and then alternatively with another click, I can just pull them back out if I realize I inadvertently pushed an email up. So it's all contained within that little corner and that little window. Now, what's allowed to synchronize with all this, besides the emails, is controlled in multiple ways. It can either be handled by an administrator, where they go and say, this is how we're going to be synchronizing, whether it be Salesforce to Outlook or both ways, or Outlook to Salesforce, how we're going to handle contacts and tasks. Are we going to allow the user to change the direction or change whether or not we're going to sync this data? There's a lot of flexibility with the Salesforce for Outlook plugin. That really allows almost any type of setup that you need when it comes to configuring this with Outlook. Now, a couple of years ago, they sort of diverted their attention, right? As everything started to shift into Lightning, they also started thinking about the same process for their plugins. So Salesforce for Outlook, they still work on this, they're still enhancing, they still have been changing versions, but that seemingly has started to take a little bit of a backseat to the Lightning for Outlook plugin, which is, the push from Salesforce. They want everything derived from the Lightning platform. So they introduced Lightning for Outlook as a new plugin, which has a lot of similar functionality, but they started to split some of this functionality. So in Salesforce for Outlook, there was a lot of stuff that was handled just within the plugin on the client side, and they decided maybe that's not the best option, and we need to split out how some of this works. So they've actually sort of created two different pieces for this, Lightning for Outlook being the first, Lightning Sync being the second piece, and we'll cover both of those as we continue forward here. So Lightning for Outlook, alternatively, is cloud-based application. So it's an app that is downloaded from the Microsoft Store that's then pushed down into your Outlook application or into your Outlook account and can run inside of the client or via the web app. So Salesforce for Outlook can only run client side, only in the application itself. Lightning for Outlook can run both inside that application and on the web version, OWA, as well. So regardless of how your users or you as a user access your email, you have access to it from both. Any user within Salesforce, again, who has the app installed and enabled through their Outlook client, because you can also go in and disable it if you decide you don't want to run it anymore, can utilize this application, but it also it has to be, this Lightning for Outlook option has to be enabled by a system administrator first. So this is an option within Salesforce that's disabled by default, and a system admin needs to go into the system and turn it on for it to be accessible by users. And now Lightning for Outlook is a little different, as I mentioned. It's split up a little more. So it allows you to handle emails and link contacts, leads, accounts, and opportunities and cases all through the plugin itself. But it also allows you to navigate through your Salesforce instance and make changes to records and also create full new records within the system. So Salesforce for Outlook would let you go in and create new cases based off of emails, and it allowed you to search, but it didn't really allow you to make full manipulation of data within the system. It was more of a read-only aspect. Lightning for Outlook actually runs a version of Salesforce inside the app itself, essentially, so that you can go in and start making changes to the data. If you realize there's a phone number or an email that's wrong, you can change it right there from within the plugin. So as you start thinking about this and thinking, well, Lightning for Outlook might be better than Salesforce for Outlook, well, there are some caveats to this. Since Lightning for Outlook is newer, it's also built on newer frameworks and newer technology, which means it's less backwards compatible. So it's been limited to work with Outlook 2013 and 16 on PC, but it does work on Mac for Outlook 2016. it's not backwards compatible with anything older than that. So you at least need to be running version Outlook client version 2013 and above. And then also when you look at the Exchange versions it functions on, you need at least 2013 or 2016 for an on-premise or Office 365 for Exchange Online to be able to utilize Lightning for Outlook. And again, you can't run both plugins, so your end user has to choose one or the other, but you can run a blended scenario in your org where you have users on both. And if you decide that you want to also manage contacts and events within Salesforce and synchronize those with Exchange, that's going to require Lightning Sync. So with Salesforce for Outlook, everything was managed within the client app itself. So you could sync contacts and events and tasks. All that was managed within Salesforce for Outlook app. The only downside is it only ran when your client is running as well. Lightning for Outlook pulled that piece out for contacts and events and moved that into Lightning Sync so it could run all the time behind the scenes, regardless of whether the client was running or not. And then the emails are managed through the client. Now, coming in this winter 18 release, they're moving tasks into Lightning for Outlook as well. So that was a piece that had been left behind initially, but that's going to be showing up here in this next winter release where tasks are going to be visible and manageable through the Lightning for Outlook plugin. So again, looking at a simple screenshot here for what this would look like or how it would appear. It doesn't matter if we were in the reading pane view or if we had the email open. In this case, I had the email open when I was taking a screenshot. But in this one, you can see on the right, this is Lightning for Outlook. So it has a Lightning feel to it. It runs as a sidebar, very similar to Salesforce for Outlook, but it has that Lightning look and feel. It's a little more expanded. It has a little more space. It might be a little easier to identify the different categories in Salesforce for Outlook. Everything was sort of clustered together. Here it's expanded a little more. So we've got people, we have accounts, then we have opportunities, we could have cases. They're all sort of grouped in their own category. And if we look at both systems side by side, on the left you've got Lightning for Outlook, on the right you've got Salesforce for Outlook. You can see the difference between the two. So on the left, you've got your essentially categories, people, accounts, opportunities all grouped over there, where then in Salesforce for Outlook, you've got the people and all the details in the top header section. The company, the account is actually tucked away in the middle there. Then all your related pieces are all underneath, grouped together as one large area. So from a space and a visual perspective, Lightning for Outlook is probably a little easier to utilize and for end users to understand and realize where things are going to go when they're clicking on certain icons than Salesforce for Outlook, even though there's the different functionality set between the two. Okay, so for Lightning for Outlook, this does require a little more setup involved because the system admin has to be involved to do it. They first need to enable it, and once they've gone through that enablement process, there's a few other things they have the ability to configure. They don't necessarily need to, but they could change the layout. They can add other things to the plugin, and we'll see that here as I fire mine up. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same order. Maybe you want to have accounts first instead of people. They can go in and rearrange all that for users, and that can be then grouped as a profile and have different people assigned to it. But after they go through and enable that, then they can provide the link for going and getting that Lightning for Outlook cloud app off of the Microsoft Store so that users can go and use it and add it to their account. Or there's a possibility that a network admin can push this out to everybody. So if you have a large organization, decide this is something you're going to do, you're going to train people on, and you're going to roll it out to everybody at once, you can have them push this out through the Microsoft administrator account and have it broadcast everyone so that it just gets pushed out to the clients. Now, after the add-in's installed, it just needs to make sure it's turned on and that the user opens Outlook, and then there will be a little icon to fire up the Salesforce Lightning for Outlook plugin. By default, as soon as it's installed, it's on, but if somebody were to inadvertently turn it off, just know that it can be enabled and disabled per account. So let me jump into my Outlook here. There we go. So within my Outlook here, I've got that same email that I'd screenshotted before. So I got this one from Tony, we'll say. This is the little icon I was talking about earlier. So there's a little Salesforce container, and within that, there's a little cloud icon and view. So if I click on that, and it doesn't matter if I'm in reading or if I go in and open the email itself, I'll just start from here. It brings up my window and starts to load Salesforce instance here over on the right. So it's going to go out. The first time you do this, it'll ask you to log in, and it'll ask you for a verification and make sure that you want to allow this and that this is acceptable. And it goes through and sets up the communication. After that, it should go initially and jump right in, and it should only take a few seconds to load. Typically, this is where it will start. Must have had a connection issue there where we were waiting for it. Normally, under normal circumstances, it's less than a 5-second load time. So from here, when we look at this, I've got my email. Here it's loaded and looked at. It's pulled people in from this email. It's pulled in related accounts. I keep going. There's opportunities assigned to this account that came from Tony. This is one of those customizations. So if I expand this out a little bit, we can see that I included a chart as well. So if I want to have charting on this, maybe I want to have opportunities reports or cases reports, I can have that embedded right in this plugin. So a user that's opening an email can then look at information from Salesforce at a glance to see what's this account worth, or how active is this account, how many open cases do they have. All those types of things can be embedded right into the plugin. I keep going down and I can see, I've got cases in here as well. So I can take this email and attach it to any one of these using these little up arrow icons, if you can see those. So next to each of the objects, I might go in and say, oh, next to people, I want to upload this email and push it up against Tony's contact. So I'm going to click this button. It's going to go through and attach that email and relate it. So, and it's taken any attachments that were there. I've got attachments enabled. Now, there weren't any attachments here, but coming back to that comment before, there is a little image icon down here for LinkedIn, so it is going to include that as an attachment and bring it up into the system. Now, on the flip side here, if I go into my Salesforce instance, there we go, and I go and look for that record, I find Tony in here in the system. Here's all that information that it was pulling the same information from here, and I get further down and I can see now this email, this activity is tagged with email and shows that here's the email that's been pushed up by me at this with a time and date stamp. And I can go into this and just take a look at it and see how it was formatted. I can look at the HTML version and I can see any of the attachments were there, who was included on it. So it relates this correctly to all the individuals that were associated with the email and then any other information. So one of the other pieces here that I commented on before was if I jump back into my email is the ability to go into individual records. So not only can I just relate this email, which Salesforce for Outlook can do something very similar, but I can instead go into this contact and say I look in here and realize I now have a business number. So I've got a phone number here I'm going to grab. I can go into his record right within the plugin. And this is all in single column like it would be if you were using a Salesforce One app, but maybe I want to stretch this out a little bit and get a little wider so I can have 2 columns of view. I can come in and I can go in and start editing this. So I can say, no, I've got his phone number. I can add that in because I didn't have that before, and I'm going to save this. So now, even though I'm still in Outlook, I haven't left anywhere, I haven't done anything. I'm actually editing and manipulating the data within Salesforce right from the plugin itself. And that's a unique advantage to the Lightning for Outlook plugin versus Salesforce for Outlook. So I come back into my record here and I'll refresh this page. I'll see that information is now populated here. So I don't necessarily have to always be in Salesforce when I'm using Lightning for Outlook. There's a definite advantage to being able to look at these, manipulate the records. I can go and look at full activity. I can go and look at all the related items that are in here and see all of the setup that I have. Now, if you're using Salesforce Classic, this might look very different because this is based off the Lightning layouts. So if you do use Lightning for Outlook and you do explain to users, or you are a user and you want to start utilizing this, just know that this is all based off of the Lightning page layouts, which might need to be set up by an administrator first. So the defaults might not be quite what you see here. We've gone through and played with this many times and adjusted it to our heart's content for this demo. But the related lists and the details and how things are arranged might need to be modified a little since it is using Lightning instead of Classic. If you're already using Lightning, then this will look exactly as it did if you were logged into Lightning through the Lightning interface. All right, so let me back out of that. Let's see here. Shrink that up. We'll jump back into this presentation. So that was the Lightning for Outlook piece. Now it has a lot of cool functionality there. They're definitely taking big strides in the right direction for making it easier just to work from your email client than they did originally with Salesforce for Outlook. So moving on to the next piece, Lightning Sync. So when Lightning for Outlook came out, they realized, we might have to split this. We don't necessarily want the client running all the time to be able to synchronize some of these things. So Lightning Sync is that background synchronization process, and it manages contacts and events. So it handles all of that communication from Exchange or Google accounts, Gmail, and Salesforce. An administrator would go in and configure it, and they need to hook it up to that specific end client, whether that be Exchange or whether that be Google. And then a user has to be assigned a profile to be part of that Lightning Sync. So it follows the same process. Not everybody would get dumped into this and be syncing automatically. You've got to assign users to it. So it does require an admin. And then contacts and events automatically get synchronized behind the scenes. And it can be configured in multiple ways. It can be one-way communication, two-way communication, depending on how you want to handle your synchronization between your two systems. So some things to look at before you just jump in and have somebody, a network admin or a system administrator, go and set this up. Just keep in mind, this works hand in hand with Lightning for Outlook. I mean, it was designed to work with that. Previously, it was called Exchange Sync, I think, and then they rebranded it Lightning Sync because they also expanded it to handle Google. That might be one of the questions, that actually is one of the questions coming up here that we'd been asked since we're focusing on Outlook. All of these things we've been talking about, they also tie into Gmail and Google as well, assuming that you have an enterprise account with Google, business account with Google. So if you're going to go and set up Lightning Sync, it requires probably a couple of people, not just your Salesforce system admin, unless they're also part of your IT group, but a network email admin, only because you need some high-level authentication for your Exchange system or your Google system to be able to tie the two together. And then when it comes to synchronization, contacts can be handled one or two-way, events can be handled one or two-way. However, if you're going to be doing two-way events where you set up an event in Salesforce and it pushes back down into your email system, you do have to set it up with OAuth for Microsoft Exchange. So there's only one setup option there. There are multiple configuration options for how you connect Salesforce to Exchange, but you have to use the OAuth version. And as I mentioned before, tasks were not part of Lightning Sync originally. They still are not, but they are being brought into Lightning for Outlook with this upcoming release. So when Lightning Sync is up and running, there's really nothing an end user needs to see. It all happens behind the scenes. From an administrative standpoint, there's monitors to monitor the sync status and to see how many records are being synced per user and how much data is being synchronized between the two systems. And it just keeps track of that information. From a configuration standpoint, it's just a matter of going in and enabling it and then connecting the two accounts together. Once you do that connection, especially if you're using OAuth, there's a synchronization that happens almost behind the scenes that creates keys and tokens between the two systems, allows them to talk, and there's no other interaction that's needed. The only thing additional from here is setting up configuration profiles so that you know, how do I want things to sync, whether it be contacts and events, one way or two way, and which users do I want to add to this profile so that they could start syncing information between the two systems. Okay, so some questions. I know we're getting down on time here. Questions from registration. We had a few that we pulled out, some that were unique and some that were common. Does Salesforce integrate with other email systems? I alluded to this a little earlier. We focus mainly on Outlook, but the answer is yes, it hooks into Gmail as well. If you have a Google Enterprise account, a business account with Google for Gmail, Lightning Sync also works with that. They have Lightning for Gmail, and Lightning Sync also ties into that as well. So you could, depending on which one you have, it works with those two systems. This was one that somebody asked, and then we also see this, we've heard this from many customers before, especially if you have an iPhone or an Android, some sort of smartphone. How do I see all these contacts on my phone? And that's a really good question. Essentially, that comes down to Lightning Sync. When you set up Lightning Sync, you can set it up to handle either a one-way or two-way synchronization between whether you're using Exchange or Google and your account. And by doing that, you can set that same account up on your phone and then have it set to pull contacts, and it will pull all those contacts from Salesforce down into your address book. Now, depending on your operating system, depending on the phone, possibly the phone software, it might not pull them right into your default address book. It might create a secondary one. From an email client perspective, from Outlook, whenever you do contact syncs, it pulls them down into its own unique folder called Salesforce Sync, and they're stored there. Then you can turn that folder into an address book, so you can type up an email and just start typing letters and Control K to do your quick find, your quick fill, and it'll pull from that address book. When it comes to your phone, it might be handled a little differently. They might sometimes dump them all into your core address book, or they might stick them into a secondary address book. But Lightning Sync is the answer to that. You can see all the contacts from Salesforce on your phone if you use Lightning Sync. And then, Salesforce Inbox. No, we did not cover that. Someone asked, are we going to be covering Salesforce Inbox? So we did not. There was a reason for that, and that is it's another piece that's added into all these components. So everything we've been talking about so far is built into your Salesforce licensing you have today. These are all features you can go in and turn on. Salesforce Inbox is a feature license, so there's a paid license subscription to add it on, but it is primarily focused as a mobile app that has some similar functionalities to what Lightning for Outlook can do, but then takes those and it expands those with more marketing tools. So it'll track when you send an email, you can push it up to Salesforce, but that Salesforce inbox will then also track when was this email opened, or was it opened? When it was opened, where was it opened at? It'll start tracking IP addresses, so you can see locations, times open, how many times it's been opened, where it was exactly. So it has a lot more of the marketing flair functionality to it, but basically ties in very well. When talking about all these other applications, Salesforce for Outlook, Lightning for Outlook, those are all still client-based or web-based. None of them really tie into mobile except for the first one, My Email is Salesforce. Salesforce Inbox fills that gap. So that's the application. It becomes your standard mail application on your phone. It replaces the mail application on iPhone or whatever you're using on Android, whether it be a Gmail app or the core mail app that came with your phone. It becomes its own mail client app, and then you start tying your accounts into it, and it starts handling that processing. So if you have a very heavy mobile sales team, or you've got people who are traveling a lot and use their mobile devices often for managing their email, then I would definitely look at Salesforce Inbox. Okay, we're winding down to the end here. Resources. We've covered a lot of information here, and there's even more information than what we've covered. We just skimmed the surface on some of these topics just to sort of give you a taste as to what these pieces are and how they fit into the Salesforce platform and how they can work for you with email. But we've gone through and compiled a bunch of information from all the Salesforce help articles and all the related information that's online. So they've gone through, Salesforce has gone through and even done a pretty decent job on saying, you know, from an email integration, what should I be using from a company standpoint? They have a good summary of all the products that they offer. And then we went in and dug into, all right, if you're going to use My Email to Salesforce or Salesforce for Outlook or Lightning for Outlook, how does all this work? What do I need to take into consideration? What are my system requirements? How do we actually use it? If I'm going to pass this off to my end users, what can I do for training materials? How do I tell them about this? So we gathered all this information. We'll be posting this slide. Andy will take this and post this slide with the information for the link to the webinar after this is done, so that you'll have this slide as well for information. So you'll have all these resources. So with that, I'm actually going to kick it back to Andy because I'm sure he has some other topics to talk about before we conclude today.
All right, thanks, Ben. All right, great content in today's user group. Before we do close things out, I just want to mention a great upcoming webinar next week right away. It's Got Salesforce, Why You Need Marketing Automation Too. So if you have Salesforce, which I assume you're attending the user group, you probably do. It's a great webinar. It's going to be with our partners from Acton, and they'll demo some of that, but also just explain marketing automation in general and why it's great to work with Salesforce. All right, that link with information and registration will be on the email follow-up that Ben mentioned. That'll have a link to the on-demand webinar today. There'll be also a link where you can check out the information on that upcoming webinar. Continuing on to our other resources. If you go to our website, ledgerypartners.com, and check out the resources tab on the top, you're going to find a vast variety of different webinars on demand, including our CRM conference sessions, where Ben actually did a few of those presentations, ebooks and white papers, our blog that you can see. You can register for just Salesforce topics and thought leadership topics, and we release and post those. You'll receive an email notification. We do have our user group like this one and training as well, and constantly coming up with new content for webinars, especially when Salesforce releases their new updates. So we also have our YouTube channel, so you can go to YouTube and check out past webinars on demand, any presentations we've done. All that information will be available on that channel as well. All right, so a final reminder, you can also contact us on our Contact Us page. Otherwise, just reach out to us through the email you received today if you have any questions. So when you get that link, be sure to share that with others in your company or network. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.